What's up, football fans? Welcome to a Wednesday episode of the Call Sheet Podcast here at the Fans First Sports Network. I'm your host, Kevin Smith. Normally on Wednesdays, we do our Whiteboard Wednesday show with my partner in crime here for the regular season, Coach Frank Lasasso. But Frank and I had some scheduling conflicts this week, so he will not be joining me today. I'm going to be going solo today. Frank will be back next week. We're going to do a breakdown of the quarterback run game, some of the more interesting quarterback run schemes that we've seen throughout the world of football this season. How do they work? Why do teams use them? How do you defend them? That'll be a great conversation next week with Frank. But for today, going solo, like I said, great opportunity for me because I'm working kind of off of a formula here during the regular season. Monday, game balls, Whiteboard Wednesday, scheme talk, hot route conversation on Fridays with Pez. Haven't really had a chance to freelance at all. And that's what I'm going to do today. And today's a great opportunity to take stock of what we've learned so far from the football season in 2025. And by football, I mean in general. I'm not confining this conversation just to the NFL, predominantly NFL, but football in general. What have we learned? 5 lessons or 5 things we've learned from football in 2025 so far. We're at about the third of the way point of the season, and that's far enough in for us to begin to draw some conclusions about some things. And let's start with this. We'll go from 5 to 1. Number 5. One thing that we've learned from this season is your fortunes, whether individually or as a team/franchise, can change on a dime. I mean, your fortunes can change quickly. Take, for example, James Franklin at Penn State. Penn State was one drive away from making it to the national championship game last year. One drive away. An unfortunate Drew Aller interception in the Notre Dame game, in the national semifinal, in the final minute of play, kept them from kicking a potentially game-winning field goal and moving on to the national championship. And because they had a lot of underclassmen or guys who were eligible to return, they shelled out a lot of NIL money. A lot of NIL money and worked hard to keep their team intact and bring it back because they believed 2025 could be the year that Penn State could win its first national championship in 40 years. And they were a top 5 team in all the polls, and they came out of the gate. Really soft opening schedule. Did not play anyone challenging for the first couple of weeks, leading up to a big showdown with Oregon at Beaver Stadium. A game that was a really tight, closely contested game that they lost in the last minute of play, again with another unfortunate Drew Aller interception as Penn State's driving in for the tying/potentially winning score. But there was no sin in that loss. I mean, it contributed to the narrative that James Franklin can't win a big game. That's been a big deal. Penn State, under James Franklin, has struggled to beat elite teams. But no sin in losing to Oregon, another top 5 team. However, the very next week, they go out to UCLA, an 0-4 team. And as a top 10 ranked team, Penn State becomes the first team in 40 years as a top 10 team to lose to an 0-4 team. And they compound that by coming home and then losing to a mediocre at best Northwestern team. Penn State becomes the first team in the poll era to lose back-to-back games as a ranked team when they are favored by more than 20 points. And James Franklin is fired. It is incredible. Imagine if that drive against Oregon ends differently. Imagine if the Penn State offense gets into the end zone and then wins that football game. And then they probably go out to California and beat UCLA. They're probably undefeated right now and maybe the number 2 ranked team in the country. And everybody's talking about the upcoming Penn State-Ohio State showdown. Instead, it's pick up the pieces time at Penn State. In the NFL, We see something similar with the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens, a perennial AFC power that has been on the doorstep of winning a championship throughout the Lamar Jackson era. They have not been able to get over that hump in the AFC to get to the Super Bowl. Their obstacles have been several. It's been Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. It's been Josh Allen and the Bills. One year it was Joe Burrow and the Bengals. They're right there every single year, however. And every single year, when you come into the season, the Ravens are on the short list of teams that can win the Super Bowl. But right now they are 1-5. They are 1-5, and they look bad in the process. And yes, they have been devastated by injuries. So many of their key players have been out. And it has been very, very difficult for them to field a competitive team given the rash of injuries that they've suffered. But at the same time, their defense is awful. Even when it's healthy, it was bad. They have questions about their defensive coordinator. They have questions about, if you talk to people in the state of Maryland, Jeff Hartman, who lives in the state of Maryland, tells me this, whether or not John Harbaugh should remain the head coach. A lot of people, a lot of Ravens fans believe that his message has grown stale. It's time for him to go. But the crazy thing is, Baltimore was being talked about as a Super Bowl contender just about 4 weeks ago. And now the talk is their season over? Is it time for a reset? Should John Harbaugh go? Amazing how quickly your fortunes can change in the sport of football. One more example real quick. Brian Daboll. Anybody who watched last Thursday night's game between the Eagles and Giants, in which the Giants surprisingly thumped the Eagles, saw Brian Daboll running around hugging and kissing players like Jackson Dart specifically had just pulled him out of a burning building. Because Brian Daboll's theoretical head was on the chopping block not too long ago, just a few weeks ago. Will Brian Daboll survive NFL firing season? And now the Giants look like a young team with a lot of life. And the insertion of Jackson Dart into the starting lineup and the jolt that Cam Scatterbo has given them allowed them to author one of the biggest upsets of the season. And now suddenly it looks like Brian Daboll is in good shape. Your fortunes can change very quickly in this business. All right, lesson number 4. Parity reigns in the NFL. Parity reigns. The NFL could not be any happier because of this. They have made it their stated goal to try to keep every one of the 32 NFL franchises as competitive as long as they possibly can in order to continue to generate interest. They have structured the schedule to promote parity. They have a draft that is scheduled to promote parity. And it's working because here we are just 6 weeks into the football season in the NFL. There are no undefeated teams. This is the earliest the 1972 Dolphins have been able to pop the champagne corks to celebrate their still unmatched record of being the only team in the last 50 years to go untied, undefeated, start to finish. Last year's Super Bowl participants, the Chiefs and the Eagles, have a combined record of 7-5, and at various times this year have been buried by the media. The top seeds in each conference right now, if the playoffs started today, the top seeds in the AFC would be the Colts and Steelers. Who saw that coming? And in the NFC, it would be the Bucs and Packers. That's maybe a little more believable, but by no means would the Bucs and Packers have been the consensus choice for the top 2 seeds in the NFC heading into the season. There's only one winless team, the hapless Jets. And I think this is the most interesting statistic that shows the overwhelming parity in the league. 22 of the league's 32 teams have between 2 and 4 losses. Or in other words, are right in the thick of things. 22 of the 32 NFL teams are right in the thick of things. Right where the NFL wants them to be. And that doesn't include the one-loss teams, of which there are 4. So that makes 26 out of the 32 teams who a third of the way into the season, you could argue, are in pretty good shape, or at least can still make a credible argument that they could be playoff teams. That is exactly what the NFL wants. Takeaway number 3, quarterbacking, as if we needed a reminder. 2025 has been a great reminder that quarterbacking is an inexact science. When you look at the odds on MVP candidates for the 2025 season, I mean, there are a few of the usual suspects on there, but in the top 5, just about any top 5 you can find on potential MVP candidates for the 2025 season, it will contain the names Baker Mayfield, Daniel Jones, and Sam Darnold. Wow. Baker Mayfield, Daniel Jones, and Sam Darnold, all of whom have been given up on by multiple teams. We know Baker Mayfield's story, former number 1 overall draft pick by the Browns, eventually washed out, bounced around, goes to Carolina, goes to the Rams, finally lands in Tampa Bay. He is arguably right now the leading candidate for MVP in the NFL, as the Bucs at 5-1 would be the number 1 seed in the NFC if the playoffs started today. Daniel Jones is got to be the comeback player of the year. It's probably neck and neck between Daniel Jones and Aaron Rodgers. But Daniel Jones, longtime starter for the Giants. They allow him to walk. He goes to Minnesota, does a little apprenticeship there, lands in Indy only because Anthony Richardson is failing as Indy's starting quarterback, and they just settle on Daniel Jones. And all he's done now is lead them to a 5-1 mark. They'd be the number 1 seed in the AFC if the playoffs started today. And Danny Dimes is playing the best football of his career. And Sam Darnold, who, again, another guy who bounced around several stops, Jets, San Francisco, Minnesota, has a revival year in Minnesota, but they're still not convinced he's the guy, the Vikings, and they let him walk and go to Seattle in favor of the untested J.J. McCarthy. Doesn't signal that they had a lot of faith in Sam Darnold's long-term success. You got to remember, he's only 28 years old. He's not like a 35-year-old quarterback. Minnesota easily could have said, he's our guy going forward. They let him go. And he is playing some great football in Seattle. But on the other end of that spectrum, let's look at the crop of college quarterbacks. This was supposed to be an historically great college class. And teams who were quarterback needy, NFL teams who were quarterback needy, were said to be jockeying with position. It was going to be a great draft season as teams tried to trade to get up in the draft to take one of these heralded quarterbacks. Drew Aller of Penn State, Arch Manning of Texas if he came out, Cade Klubnik of Clemson, Garrett Nussmeier of LSU, Lenore Sellers of South Carolina, all of whom were projected as top 10 picks. And oh, by the way, a third of the way into the season, none of whom are now being projected as top 10 picks. Maybe Sellers. Aller was bad and is now done for the year with an injury. He may try to find a way to go back to college next year because of his draft stock plummeting. Manning is almost certainly going back to college because he has shown himself not ready for the NFL. Klubnik has played his way out of the first round. Nussmeier has probably played his way out of the first round. Sellers has been good, but also injured. The best quarterbacks in college football this year have been guys that you probably didn't even hear of heading into the season. The Moore kid in Oregon. Fernando Mendoza from Indiana, who right now is being talked about as the number 1 overall pick. Fernando Mendoza out of Indiana. How many people were singing his praises coming into the 2025 season? John Mateer in Oklahoma, who looks a little bit more like a tailback than a quarterback. Ty Simpson at Alabama, who sat the bench for 3 years, waiting for his shot. Authored a clunker in the season opener against FSU, Florida State, but has been really good the last 4 weeks. Is that the guy? Is that the guy you're going to trade up for in the first round? Point being, we just don't know. The guys who look like sure things suddenly are not. The guys who look like they've been written off are suddenly having their careers resurrected. It's the hardest position to play in all of sports, I would argue. And because of that, it is the hardest to predict the fortunes of prospects or even the future of guys who are already in the league. All right, lesson number 4. Speaking of quarterbacks, if you're going to draft one overall, if you are a team jockeying for the number 1 overall pick, like the New York Jets, who are 0-6, like maybe the Cleveland Browns, who, yes, they took 2 quarterbacks in this past season's draft, but if Cleveland winds up with the 1-1, it wouldn't be shocking for them to go quarterback again. You better have a plan in place. You better be confident that you have the right team. And by team, I don't mean your actual football team. I mean your coaching staff, your development staff, your general manager, etc. You better have the right team in place, the right group of individuals in place to develop that quarterback, to put that quarterback on a path for success. Because the last 4 quarterbacks drafted number 1 overall, those teams have all fired their head coach in the middle of that quarterback's rookie season, which is a terrible recipe or plan for development. Trevor Lawrence, taken number 1 overall back in 2020, they had to fire Urban Meyer midseason in the midst of a disaster. Bryce Young, taken number 1 overall by the Panthers a couple years later. They fired, kind of surprisingly, Frank Reich during his rookie year. Last year, the Bears took Caleb Williams, number 1 overall, fired Matt Eberflus midseason, and Tennessee took Cam Ward, number 1 overall this year, and they just fired their head coach, Brian Callahan. And now you have to remake the culture, reshape the coaching staff, bring change to a player who is in the process of learning how the game works at the NFL level. It's a terrible recipe for developing a young quarterback. Not surprisingly, all those quarterbacks have struggled. Trevor Lawrence got off to a pretty good start, but seems to have plateaued since then. Is having a good year under Liam Cohen, but he's had his ups and downs. Bryce Young has not yet shown himself to be a reliable starter in the NFL, nor has Caleb Williams, and Cam Ward is having a fairly miserable season so far in Tennessee. Not necessarily Cam Ward's fault, has a terrible supporting cast and obviously an unstable coaching situation. But will the Titans be able to get Cam Ward on track so he can become that franchise quarterback? If you're going to take the QB 1-1, you got to have the right people in place to develop him or you're going to waste that pick. Lastly, we'll end with this. Number 1 lesson. Football remains as popular as ever, maybe more than ever. Football is overwhelmingly America's number 1 sport, and it is growing increasingly into a global sport. Television ratings this season, through 6 weeks, are up 8% over last year. They are the highest overall through 6 weeks since 2010. The Philadelphia-Kansas City regular season game broke a regular season record of viewers, 33.8 million viewers for that Super Bowl rematch in week 2. The week 5 Kansas City-Jacksonville game broke a Monday Night Football viewing record of 22.3 million. That's Kansas City-Jacksonville. Jacksonville does not have a national following. It barely has a local following. And yet 22.3 million viewers. Not coincidentally, Taylor Swift dropped a big album, a new album that week. So the Taylor Swift intrigue was probably fueling some of that interest. Other reasons, gambling. My goodness, you can bet on anything under the sun that is football related right now. And the NFL has tied itself to BetMGM, DraftKings, ESPN Bet. The NFL has made so many deals with these gambling houses and is promoting the in-game gambling. If you click on The Athletic, it's got an entire page devoted just to betting on football. The interest in college football is at an all-time high, partly because of how much interest the draft now generates. The draft has become the off-season football that people are obsessed with. It's a way to keep football going in March and April. Draft interest through the roof, so interest in college players is through the roof. There are pop culture connections. NFL players, and I'm not just talking about Taylor Swift, but NFL players now getting endorsement deals through fashion, through music, showing up all across your TV in one commercial after another. Parity is, of course, driving the interest, and the international commitment is driving the interest. Long story short, football is king in America and increasingly is becoming a global presence. So the NFL gets a lot wrong. They get a lot wrong, man. They sometimes hit the wrong notes in terms of the way players are treated, former players are treated, insensitivity towards things like domestic abuse, but they sure can market themselves, and they're doing a great job of it. All right, that is our Wednesday show. 5 things we've learned from football so far in 2025. Join me on Friday for my conversation with Pez, our Hot Route conversation. We're going to start bringing guests on to the Hot Route to join Pez and I and expand our conversations. That's going to be fun. You can also check out me on X at KTSmithFFSN, doing a ton of video work on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesdays become All 22 Tuesday, where I do a lot of short, 4 or 5, 6-minute video film rooms on various subjects. Had one up yesterday on outside zone and how that's being utilized all around the NFL. Steelers fans had one up on their defensive improvements that the Steelers have made that's fueling Pittsburgh's 3-game win streak. I'll have some more up tomorrow as well. So hope you'll join me for that. Until then, hope everybody has a great day. Take care.